Among other things, I was very proud of this turn of events before Françoise. After all, an hour after my mother refused to come to me and from the height of her greatness ordered me to sleep, I was elevated to the rank of adult. My sadness was unexpectedly perceived as a sign of some manhood. I was now free to cry. I should have been happy, but I didn't feel happy. I had the feeling that this first concession by my mother was painful for her, that this was her first rejection of the ideal she created for me, and that for the first time in her life, despite her courage, she admitted defeat. I had the feeling that if I had won a victory, it was over her, that my victory was tantamount to the victory of illness, sorrows or age, that it weakened her will, weakened her mind, and that this evening, which opened a new era, would forever remain in her memory as a sad date. If I had the courage, I would have said to my mother, "No, I don't want to. Don't lie down in my room." But I knew her practical, realistic, as they would now say, mind, which balanced in her the ardently idealistic nature of her grandmother. I knew that now that the mistake was made, my mother would at least prefer to let me enjoy the bliss of peace and not bother my father. Of course, my mother's beautiful face still shone with youth that evening, when she so tenderly stroked my hands and tried to stop my tears. It seemed to me that this should not have happened. Her anger would have been less painful for me than this extraordinary tenderness, which my childhood did not know. It seemed to me that with a blasphemous and stealthy hand I had just drawn the first wrinkle in her soul, that because of me she got her first grey hair. At this thought, I sobbed even more inconsolably, and then it struck me that my mother, who never allowed herself to be tender with me, was suddenly moved and tried to hold back her tears. Realizing that I had noticed this, she said with a laugh, "Oh, you are my sweetheart, oh, you are my siskin. Stop crying right now, otherwise your mother will be as stupid as you. Listen, since we both don't want to sleep, we won't upset each other, let's do something, read something." There were no books in my room. "But what if I bring those books that your grandmother wants to give you for your birthday? Will this spoil your pleasure? Think. You won't be disappointed?" On the contrary, I expressed delight. Then my mother brought a pack of books, and through the paper in which they were wrapped, I could only distinguish that they were of different sizes, but even at first glance, superficial and cursory, I was convinced that they outshine the box of paints that I received in a New Year's gift, and the silkworms I got for my birthday last year. They were The Damned Swamp, Françoise Le Champi, Little Fadette, and The Pipers. As it turned out later, my grandmother first chose for me the poems of Musset, Tom Russo and Unhealthy. Like sweets and cake, she was inclined to think that the powerful breath of genius had no more dangerous and no less life-giving influence on the soul of a child than the influence of fresh air and sea wind exerted on his body. But when my father found out what she was going to give me, he said that it was crazy, then, so that I would not be left without a gift. She went to Jewel Viscount to the bookseller. It was a hot day, and she returned so exhausted that the doctor warned her mother that grandmother should not be so overworked, and changed those books for 4 rural novels by George Sand. "Daughter," she said to my mother, "I would never put harmful books into your child's hands." In fact, she never bought anything from which it would not be possible to extract food for the mind, especially such food that something beautiful delivers to us, teaching us to find pleasure not in achieving worldly well-being and not in satisfying vanity, but in something else.